Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, broadcasting live from the Mackinac Policy Conference. I'm Robin Vincent. The Skillman Foundation is one of Detroit's most influential philanthropic organizations. It's using millions of dollars to shape education policy and priorities in the city. As Detroit's public schools struggle with chronic underfunding, low literacy rates, and crumbling infrastructure, Skillman's decisions hold real weight for educators, parents, and children. Angelique Power leads the foundation, and she's promised to listen deeply and support solutions rooted in Detroit's communities. But how can Skillman best leverage its wealth and influence to truly change the trajectory for Detroit kids? Angelique Power joins us now to discuss the foundation's responsibility, role, and vision for Detroit's educational future. Angelique, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, Robin. Thanks for having me.
So, Detroit schools have seen improvements, as you and I were just discussing before we got on the mic, from test scores to teacher pay, but they're still struggling.
Yes.
Students face low literacy rates and infrastructure problems, to name a few. With the Skillman Foundation's big financial influence, how specifically are you making sure your resources address the core of these problems?
What I'll say is I started at Skillman almost 4 years ago, and I spent a long time talking with students. Young people are brilliant, as I'm sure you know, with educators who are also brilliant, who are deep in these education systems and have these bigger ideas of what needs to be changed, and with residents, family members, after-school providers, out-of-school time providers, policymakers, business leaders. Everybody wants something better for our youth in Detroit, across Michigan. And people advised me that the education systems in Detroit, and I say systems with a plural, are complicated. History matters in terms of all the things that have happened to Detroit.
Like emergency management, mayoral control, exactly. These very traumatic issues of neglect and oversights.
Yes. And that, you know, whether it is policy, things that policy has done, things that philanthropy sometimes have done. Often it happened to Detroiters or for Detroiters, but not with Detroiters. The other thing that people shared with me was that these quick fixes, these silver bullets, they are short-lived and they are unsustainable. And they aren't going to change the depth of issues that we have. We actually need a wholesale systems upgrade. And when people say that, it almost like you can glaze over. Like, what does that mean, a systems change? But there are a few things that we've discovered at Skillman, and we have partners across the state that we're trying to work on this with. First of all, Detroit's fate rests in Lansing's favor. There's nothing that you can solve for Detroit schools solely in Detroit.
Could we talk about one thing in regards to
Yes.
that? And it's something that we just discussed before getting on the mic again, and that is this notion of it being Detroit versus everybody in Lansing.
Yes. Yeah. You know, I think that's also historical context, too. I think that for Detroiters, the Detroit versus everybody is an earned phrase, right?
Yeah.
And it's because it felt for so long like everybody against Detroit. And so, you know, a lot of what we think about is that what Detroit schools struggle with, that's the same thing that rural communities struggle with. There is lack of transportation, there is underfunding, you know, even the idea of privatizing education, of providing coupons to people to go to private schools or religious schools. The reality is that where are these private and religious schools when public schools in some rural communities are the only school and it's the largest employer? So a part of the systems analysis is actually to understand that we are pretty interconnected in terms of the issues that we're facing. What we need is a vision. We need a vision for education in Michigan. And the state is responsible for education in Michigan. They're responsible that every child has a quality education, period. And so if our vision is we want students to, you know, graduate being able to create a future of their own desire, or that we even have a vision that's like we want students to graduate with high reading and math scores, something very concrete, then everything flows from there. The structure of the education system flows from there. There are checkpoints all along the way that make sure that students are achieving that exact thing. Teachers are actually evaluated based on that. And then we fund the heck out of it, like we actually want it to succeed. But we are lacking that vision, and we're also have a structure that's not working. The curriculum instructional core needs an update. And teaching in general needs like not only more resourcing, but a complete rethink for the 21st century.
How do you measure if your investments into trying to create more of this holistic system that you're envisioning, how do you measure if those investments are genuinely effective?
So people-powered education is the name of the strategy that Skillman uses. And I'm going to break it down super fast. It is grassroots, grass tops. It takes grassroots, grass tops to make change, a lot of people. And so we fund the ground builders. We fund a lot of young people, educators, residents. We also fund education advocates. You see a lot of them here, and they work really closely on policy. If you look at a place like Mississippi, which has made huge gains in the last 20 years, people think it's because they instituted like a literacy curriculum. And maybe that was one part of it. But it actually was this combination of grassroots and grass tops, stick-to-itness, people sticking to for 20 years, a singular focus on increasing reading scores, and then also adjusting as things weren't working. What we have right now in Michigan is a flip. Every time we sort of have a new administration, we flip something. We inject a lot of silver bullet ideas into it. So when we measure, a lot of what we measure, student outcomes are extremely important. That's at the end of the measurement. Student outcomes right now, what you're seeing, that tells you how well the system is working, not how well a student is performing.
And we know it's not working that well.
And it's not working that well. So how do we measure? How activated are our organizations, our community organizations? How resourced are they? How much are the coalitions reflecting a diverse group across Michigan? What are the policies that are coming forward, and what's passing? The dyslexia bill is a really good example of that. That was years of work, of grassroots, of inside game, outside game. Now we have a funded mandate to check to make sure that our students' special needs are met.
Critics say foundations like Skillman wield tremendous power but aren't always transparent. How do you ensure that your decision making is accountable to the communities affected by your grants?
Critics are correct. That is right. And that is an issue. And so the accountability, one of our 4 pillars that we have at Skillman is all about being equitable and racially equitable and accountable to our communities. We release analysis on racial equity so people know exactly where every penny goes, and they know like what types of organizations it's going to. The other thing is that when we created our new strategy, it was not done in-house, like in a conference room with us just coming up with ideas. It was co-designed by those that are inside of school systems so that they could say, no, that's not working, this is what we need. Even the metrics I'm describing to you, those are vetted by community so that we know that they're better and that they work.
This is the Metro broadcasting live from the Mackinac Policy Conference. I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about the role of philanthropic organizations with Skillman Foundation CEO Angelique Power. Now, Angelique, you mentioned that one of the ways that you are trying to rebuild and nourish Michigan's education system is working with young people. And I want to discuss, last year you gave 30 youth-supporting nonprofits $250,000. Young people had a hand in deciding which organizations to fund. How exactly did you incorporate young people into the process?
Well, you said I gave that money, but really the young people gave that money. I have a youth council, and we are actually in the process of interviewing for the 3rd cohort of the Skillman Youth Council. These are brilliant young people from Detroit. They give away $250,000 every year. they make up the rubrics, they decide what they want to fund, they decide what the application looks like, what the decision making looks like, and every year it kind of changes. Then also every year they negotiate for more dollars. So really, we don't do it so that we can train them on what we do. We do it so that we can learn from them on how they would do philanthropy.
Let's stay on that topic of what you're learning from young people. We know that young people right now are struggling with a number of different issues. A lot of them are having a hard time with anxiety and depression. We know the fallout of the pandemic continues to be a very big trauma point. Educators say they're not reading and writing like they used to. What are the big problems that you hear young people are struggling with most?
Mental health is definitely something that young people will talk about. Here's what I'll say to you, and I honestly don't know the answer. I don't know if young people are more traumatized because of the pandemic, which was traumatizing, or if young people are more honest. And they're just more willing to say, hey, I'm struggling with anxiety. Hey, I'm struggling with depression. So that's an example of a place where I think adults could learn a lot from how young people are in touch with themselves and with what they need. Young people are disillusioned by so many institutions, not just foundations, but government, universities. They look at these huge institutions and they think to themselves like that there's hypocrisy, that there's, unnecessary red tape. And then the other thing I'll say about young people is that, I always say they don't want a piece of the pie. They want market share in the bakery. They want to make the decisions. And so often what they will do is they'll look for youth-led organizations. They want to know where youth aren't just sort of tokenized, but where they're making decisions. And the final thing I'll say about young people, I could say a lot, but they're very intersectional in their thinking. So like we are an education foundation. Well, education is connected to economic reality and health systems and to everything. And so when they look at it, their analysis is like, what are all of the systems that come together, and then what are the solutions that build from that?
When you talk about systems and young people being frustrated with them, it does make me think about the role of foundations, which exist in part because society is very unequal. If we had more democratic decision making, people would have more choice over where money is directed. What do you make of this tension?
Yeah, I think I've thought a lot about this because I think of myself in some ways as an organizer inside of philanthropic spaces. There is hypocrisy. There is the question of like, where did the money come from? And if, what you're solving for is a part of, a societal creation, then is the output of grants equal to the, causal harm? It's interesting that you're asking me this question right now, because there is an executive order that has come out against charitable foundations and universities, accusing us of illegal discrimination. And, any day we're waiting for the 9 to be named, where we can assume some of the things that have already happened are accusations of illegal DEI for funding things like climate justice, or things like Black Lives Matter. With that sort of illegal DEI, it's also been used that those are, you can be charged with domestic terrorism.
Can we just stop for a moment and reflect on that phrase, illegal DEI?
Yeah, nobody can see because this is a radio, but I do air quotes whenever I say illegal DEI. It really is. What that means is actually the antithesis of the values of being an American. Americans are actually all about belonging and inclusivity, that is actually what makes us greater. But now, because of the vitriolic rhetoric that's coming out of the administration, it is to make us feel like somehow we're doing something wrong by caring about everyone in America.
About some of the most vulnerable members of communities.
And all people in communities. When you're practicing belonging, it's belonging for everybody. It isn't one against the other. It actually benefits society as a whole.
I derailed you from.
I mean, I'm like, honey, we can go on about this one, but this accusation against foundations, it's foundations that have 500 million or more in their endowment, and it is also an accusation against nonprofits in general. They are being called NGOs, which is a term that's used internationally.
Non-government organization.
Exactly, but it's the rhetoric is NGOs, nonprofits, charitable foundations, fat cats, elitists. Like, the reality is, and my colleague Ridgway White from CS Mott wrote about this, when the Flint water crisis happened, which was a government failure, it was actually people, community members, nonprofits, and charitable foundations that stood in for a long time, from everything from buying bottled water for years for people to then working to repair the pipes. A lot of it to me is about the freedom of expression, the freedom to give where you want to give in your community. Nonprofits, 75% of people polled have feelings that are like warm and trusting of nonprofits. That number is much lower when you talk about government. So foundations are nonprofit organizations. They are there basically to be a funding mechanism to help people help people. We can have a philosophical debate about where money comes from, and I think that transfers over to a capitalist society of how we function and where money in general comes from. But the reality is that nonprofits, charitable foundations are community members. We're everyday people who live in communities making decisions about what is best for our community, and we need to protect that.
I know you have to run, Angelique, but I have two very quick rapid-fire questions for you. First, what are you doing to fight back?
Yeah, I'm using my voice, and I'm being honest. Truth is, a commodity that's in short supply right now. And I am taking every opportunity I can to say what's true, what's honest, and using the platforms that Skillman affords. I'm also building relationships with anyone who will build relationships with us. We center young people. That's what we care about, that kids can build bold destinies, and that's not a partisan thing. That is a human thing.
My last question for you. We heard Mayor Mike Duggan here yesterday. He was talking very specifically about K-12 education. This is something we have not heard from the mayor. Certainly, he's done a lot for Detroit, but focusing on education has not been one of those things. What do you want to see from the next mayor of Detroit when it comes to their appetite for improving education?
The truth of the matter is that, while the mayor of Detroit has not had mayoral control, there are so many things that can be done by the next mayor for Detroit public schools and for public charter schools. We want the next mayor to think about any deal that they create for Detroit, something should go back to the public school students. We want the next mayor to think about every department they have, Parks and Rec, different places. Not only how can they work with the public schools, but how can young people be part of that administration? We have a youth council. We think the city should have a youth council. That's just the tip of the iceberg. We have lots of ideas. We're talking to as many folks that will talk to us, but we think the next mayor needs to center education for real in the city and see what can grow from that. Because honestly, Detroit's transformation will not happen unless the schools are centered.
Angelique Power, CEO of the Skillman Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro here at the Mackinac Policy Conference.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Coming up, WDET's Russ McNamara has been talking with a lot of people on Mackinac for this year's policy conference. Up next, we'll speak with him about what he made of a conversation he had with Governor Gretchen Whitmer. We'll be right back here on the Metro. Stay with us.